I'm here with Jim Halfpenny. Jim joined with Militant and the Committee for the Workers' International about 50 years ago, in probably early 1974. So we'd like to take this opportunity on the anniversary of the 50 years since the creation of the CWI to have a chat with Jim about what he remembers about his first involvement with Militant way back in the 1974 itself. So Jim, thanks for taking time to speak to us today. What do you remember about how you got involved or first came across Militant?
Good day, Philip. It's a long time ago, trying to remember this. Actually, I first came into political activity when I was 15, and that was joining the Labour Party Young Socialists. The organisation of the Labour Party Young Socialists way back in the mid-60s was pretty poor at the time, and my commitment to that faded away. However, in November 1973, a by-election took place in Glasgow constituency of Govan, in which the SNP defeated the Labour Party, and that seemed to promote and encourage a number of people to come into the Labour Party, like myself, in order to try and combat that rise of nationalism, right-wing nationalism at the time. And it is at that point, during the subsequent general election of February 1974, that I was much more greatly involved in politics within the Labour Party and certainly within the trade union movement as well. And it was at that point I began to come across different ideas, particularly from our own comrades.
And that would have been in and around the Militant newspaper at that time. Now, you probably would have been 19, 20 years old, somewhere around that. But one of the things that seemed to mark Militant out was its genuine commitment to building revolutionary socialist ideas among young people in the west of Scotland, young working class people, and of course the orientation Militant had to the workplaces, to the trade unions, to the organisations of the working class. What was your first year or two's involvement like in terms of that work? What kind of work were you involved in with Militant?
I think in the early days, the comrades were talking to me and were encouraging me to become involved in more and more activity. And I seemed to respond to that on the basis that I'd come from a fairly socialist family, a socialist background. My father, certainly, his political ideas were clearly to the left of the Labour Party. And when our comrades started speaking to me, it seemed to reflect and echo the ideas which I'd been hearing throughout my life. And therefore I responded to the ideas of revolutionary socialism fairly easily. I understood and I was impressed by their organisation, their commitment, and in particular, the clarity of their understanding and the level of their understanding of politics, which went beyond anything that I was experiencing in the Labour Party. The work was significant. It was intense at times. We certainly worked within the Labour Party. We took control of the Labour Party Young Socialists to the chagrin of the Labour Party leadership. But a great deal of the work was done within trade unions. And as a young member of the Labour Party Young Socialists, I tended to be out early mornings, workplaces, selling the newspaper, talking to shop stewards as they were going in, etc. And that was critical work for my understanding and for building not only the ideas of socialism, but for building the organisation. But I think I would have to say also that we were running crazy, if you like, 8 days a week. We were doing so much work. We were talking to people, we were selling newspapers, we were talking to contacts. And one of the things that I think at the time we made a little bit of a mistake on was the neglect of theory. And after a long discussion among the comrades, we realised that we had to balance that. So running about in theory were absolutely critical to have that balance. And I think that's essential for the organisation today. But it was through that understanding, through the ideas of Marxism, that we established ourselves within the working class at that time. I think also, as I'm thinking, we were very successful in many of those occasions. I mean, we filled the city halls in Glasgow, which was a substantial achievement. At the same time that the comrades in Liverpool were establishing their place in socialist history, and therefore it was a successful period for us.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that the ideas of militant became really strong in Glasgow and the west of Scotland throughout the 1980s. And that marked, as you say, with the Liverpool council struggle, but also the poll tax, which, as we know, was introduced in Scotland a year before it was introduced in England and Wales. And the building of the mass non-payment campaign of the poll tax must have also been a real highlight in terms of the work that we were carrying out, a bit later on in after 1987. What do you remember about the poll tax struggle?
I think for us, the achievement of the poll tax in part was the fact that through our work within the class, within the trade union movement, etc., we were able to identify very quickly the mood or the pulse of ordinary people who would then be prepared to take on a struggle against the Thatcher government. And I think our experience, our work, and our preparation allowed us to organise ourselves and organise the people who come into that movement in a very, very effective way. And it absolutely goes without saying that the ideas and the training that goes along with revolutionary ideas of Marxism was fundamental to the success of the anti-poll tax campaign.
Yeah, because it was a movement that eventually got rid of the poll tax and even brought down its architect, Margaret Thatcher. Now, going into the 1990s, we obviously had a more complicated period for Marxists. If you like, after you joined the 70s and 80s, there were significant advances for Marxism, for militant in the west of Scotland and in Scotland generally. But, in contradistinction to that, after the collapse of Stalinism and the throwing back of socialist consciousness, it was a more difficult period. Why did you stick with the ideas of the Committee for the Workers' International, even at a time when it was more difficult, and even where there were questions raised about why do you still need a revolutionary party? These were ideas that were challenged in the period of the 1990s in particular.
Yes, it was a difficult time, and I think everybody was looking around all sorts of ideas as to see where we went from that point. But to me, it was simply the clarity of the ideas. Okay, the ideas had been knocked back a bit. We weren't getting necessarily the same response from our class, but nevertheless, it was clear that the ideas were still the correct ideas. And although we weren't getting as big a response as we had in the past, we were still getting a response from the genuine, if you like, thinkers within the working class, the people who were, if you like, the leaders within the working class, within the trade union movement that we were dealing with, who were responding to what we were saying in the same way that they had always responded. But again, with the confusion that was taking place within politics over that period of time, it was understandable that people would fade away from our ideas. But to be honest, it was never a doubt in me that these ideas were the correct position, because the clarity of explanation coming from, our leading comrades over those years, and in particular, I would have to mention the role of Peter Taft, who was absolutely exceptional, and we stand on his shoulders today in terms of all of our understanding. And that allowed me to maintain a belief that the ideas that we held, the ideas of Marxism, were the ideas to continue with.
And of course, one of the things that marked Militant and the Committee for the Workers' International, and today, of course, Socialist Party Scotland, to carry on the ideas of Militant, was our commitment to the working class and particularly to the trade unions and the trade union movement. Now, you're a joint branch secretary of the EIS trade union, the teachers union, the biggest teachers union in Scotland. And of course, you have, in particular, along with your members, been playing a leading role in the strike wave to combat the cost of living crisis. In 2022 and 2023, the EIS had a number of strikes involving teachers. And what was your experience then? How would you summarise those strikes over the last couple of years?
Well, we had for many years suffered from the EIS being led by a right-wing cabal who worked hand in glove with our employers to ensure that workload increased and wages fell in real terms. But my understanding was quite simply that they were rowing in a different direction from the membership. You could sense within the membership the pressures and the problems that existed on a day-to-day basis, and it was the very opposite of what the right wing of the union was saying. And as a consequence of that, we actually removed the right wing quite quickly. And I have to say, I remember one young comrade within the organisation, within the CWI, saying to me, "How do you know when your ideas are ready? How do you know when the working class or the people you're dealing with are going to accept our demands, our transitional demands?" And my answer was, I didn't have a definitive answer. I didn't actually know, but you just sensed through your work within the working class how people were responding to you. And this was exactly the case with the teachers. The teachers historically were not militant, but it was clear that teachers over many, many years had moved away from what appeared to be a middle-class occupation to a clear working-class occupation, filled mostly by women. And that was the significant part of the struggle, that women in particular were coming in to that struggle, were coming into the fight. And it became apparent to me and to others that they were ready. They were ready to take it on because the conditions that they were facing within education were significantly poor. And as a consequence, we understood that we were now at the stage of taking industrial action in a fashion which we'd never taken before. And that became clear, I think, not only to me, but to others around me.
That's good, Jim. Thanks very much for that. I think that's a good point to conclude this interview today on the current situation and the new possibilities that will open up for the ideas of the Committee for the Workers' International in Scotland, with the working class beginning to move again into struggle. And just thank you for taking part in this interview, Jim, and thank you very much for your 50 years of commitment to Marxism and to the CWI.
Thank you. Bye-bye.